As discussed in previous videos, we looked at the labor unions that the professional sports leagues have. Okay. Now, these unions will often butt heads with management in the negotiations, and this can lead to either a strike where the players walk off or a lockout where the owners tell the players they cannot play. So from 1972 to 1994, every renewal of the collective bargaining agreement in Major League Baseball was accompanied by a strike or lockout. So whenever they had these contract negotiations, there would either be a strike or a lockout. Each of the four major North American sports leagues has had some sort of work stoppage since 1980. And this table here just shows some of them. It doesn't have all the most recent ones, but you can see these strikes and lockouts in all the different sports. Okay. So let's talk about the economic theory of labor conflict. So economists recognize that they reconcile strikes with rational behavior by acknowledging the role of uncertainty that plays into it. Okay. So, you have the two sides. You have the owner side and you have the player side. All right. Now, the player side is represented by the union as a whole and the owner side by the league as a whole. Okay. So, if both sides knew what the other side was willing to give up or accept, these negotiations would go much quicker. But in reality, they don't. There's a lot of uncertainty. So uncertainty can affect negotiation in one of two ways. Either there's an overly pessimistic view of reality that may cause one party to accept a worse settlement, or an unduly optimistic perception of reality can prevent one or both parties from making necessary concessions in time to prevent the conflict. Now, the uncertainty might be aggravated by a mistrust of the other side. If one party has a reason to mistrust the counterpart, then it runs the risk of disregarding the truthful position. If both labor and management know exactly how far they can push the other side, they can typically reach a settlement without resorting to conflict. But in reality, doesn't happen a lot. So this figure here shows if you're just looking at wages, for example. So you have the minimum amount that unions would be willing to accept, right? And then they want to make more, however. Then you have the maximum amount that the employers or the leagues are willing to pay, but they want to have less. Right? So you can look at this and say, all right, well, let's just go within this contract zone here. All right? This is where both sides want to be, and let's just go there. Now, if both sides knew this, yes, this would be a lot easier. But in reality, there's a problem. Unions don't know what the teams and the leagues want. Leagues don't know what the unions are willing to expect. All right? Willing to accept. So, for example, let's say that this is the contract zone, but the union thought the employers would the other way. So let's say that the union this is where they're willing to accept. But let's say the employer thinks that they're willing to accept down here, this lower wage. So they will be trying to fight that. At the same time, employers may be willing to have a concession up to this wage here, but the unions think that they can go higher. On top of that, even if both sides knew or were able to figure out where both sides were willing to go, they both want to fight for this contract zone, all right, to be on the higher end. So for the teams, they want to get as close to this point, as close to the most willing that the teams are willing to do as they can. Owners want to get as close to this point. So there's a lot that goes into this, and this contract zone, while it may look small, can be billions of dollars of revenue that is being discussed. Now, the position of the contract zone will depend on the two sides' thread points. If the union's alternative opportunities improve, then its threat point corresponds to a higher wage, and the lower end of the contract zone rises, all right, which is shown in figure A here. All right, so if you have the power of a union, it'll be able to get up here. Now, if the firm has better alternatives, if the firm has more power, the contract zone is going to move more towards the lower wage. Right. So the settlement is going to depend on the bargaining strength of the two sides. If the unions have more power, it's going to be higher. If the teams have more power, it's going to be lower. Right. Now, the problem arises when the workers' firms both, again, don't know how far they can push the other side, or even how far they're willing to go themselves. When they are overly optimistic, neither side proposes settlement in the contract zone. So, for example, this is kind of what I talked about the previous one. So you have what is acceptable by the unions and what is acceptable by the employers. Right? But let's say that the employers thought that the union was willing to go lower here. And so they thought they were willing to go down here. So while the actual contract zone, which is the zone that would be both acceptable for the unions and the owners, is in here, this area B, the employers, the teams, may look at it as, well, this is it here, this area A. And again, the owners are trying to get as low to this point as they can. And as long as they're below this point here, which is the minimum unions are willing to accept, there's not going to be a deal. Okay. So the difference between the perceived contract zone and the actual contract zone can cause a lot of problems because neither side knows if the other is playing hardball or if it's really the case that they won't go there. Right? And so this explains why you have strikes and lockouts. Right? With the union and collective bargaining, there have been issues before with the leagues. There will be issues going forward, and this just helps to explain why that might be the case.